Gunsmoke Valley. The sun rose over the ridges of Mindoro, its golden light spilling across valleys thick with kogon grass, bamboo groves, and the silent flow of rivers that had witnessed generations of struggle. The land itself bore scars, some from nature, others from decades of conflict. Farmers in small huts tended to their fields cautiously, always aware that somewhere beyond the mist, men with guns moved like shadows. They had grown used to the uneasy silence, the kind that stretched before an inevitable storm. That morning, the storm had already gathered in a place the soldiers called Gunsmoke Valley, a natural choke point between rolling hills. A clash was brewing. The name wasn't official. It had come from the memories of past encounters when the air turned gray with gunpowder and smoke lingered in the foliage. Today, the valley would once again live up to its name. The 14th Infantry Battalion of the Philippine Army had been operating in Mindoro for weeks, following intelligence that the new People's Army had regrouped and fortified themselves near Sitio Maputi. Reports indicated the insurgents had dug trenches and established camps along the valley, using its natural cover as both shield and fortress. The army had orders: flush them out, dismantle the stronghold, and cripple their operations. Captain Elias Mercado stood at the edge of a ridge overlooking the valley. His face was sharp, chiseled not by vanity but by years of combat and the endless weight of command. At 36, he had fought in Samar, Davao, and Basilan, and had seen men he trained, laughed with, and called brothers fall in the mud and dirt of forgotten fields. He carried those ghosts silently, stitched behind the hard lines of his face. With binoculars pressed against his eyes, he scanned the valley below. Shadows moved in the thick brush. Too many for farmers. He knew what that meant. Behind him, his men tightened straps on their helmets and checked their rifles, M16s gleaming under the morning sun. Some prayed silently, others joked to mask their nerves. They were young, too young, Elias often thought. War ate youth first. Private First Class Dizon, barely 20, had never seen his newborn son, born last month in Pampanga. Corporal Salonga kept a photo of his mother tucked in his pocket. Even Sergeant Reyes, a battle-hardened veteran, hummed a tune from his province to steady himself. These little rituals were the only armor they had against fear. Captain, Lieutenant Santos, his operations officer, approached. Scouts report about 50 to 60 armed elements down there. Trenches dug along the slope. Looks like they're expecting us. Elias lowered the binoculars. Then we won't disappoint them. His voice was calm, but his stomach twisted. The valley was a kill zone. Whoever stepped inside would be painted against open ground, perfect targets for ambush. But orders were orders. The plan was simple, at least on paper. Alpha Company would advance from the west, Bravo Company from the east, squeezing the NPA unit into the valley. Artillery was on standby a few kilometers away, but Elias knew the limitations. Too much shelling and civilians might suffer. This wasn't a war fought in deserts far from homes. This was fought in the middle of someone's backyard. Every bullet risked more than just soldier and insurgent. At 0800 hours, the order was given. The soldiers descended into the valley, boots crunching against dried grass, rifles raised, senses sharpened. The air was heavy with humidity, the kind that clung to skin and made every breath labored. Birds scattered suddenly from the trees, startled not by men but by what was coming. The first shot cracked like thunder. A sniper round whizzed past, embedding itself in a tree trunk inches from Reyes's head. Then came the eruption. Bursts of gunfire from the hills, the rattle of M16s answered by the heavier bark of AK-47s. The valley exploded into chaos. "Cover! Cover!" Elias shouted, dropping behind a mound of earth. Bullets tore through leaves, spat dirt into the air, and screamed past ears. The NPA fighters had the high ground, pouring fire down like rain. Tracer rounds cut streaks of light across the valley's green canvas. Private Dizon fell, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. Salonga dragged him behind a boulder, firing back blindly. The smell of gunpowder mixed with the earthy scent of the valley, thick and suffocating. The NPA fighters were disciplined, not the ragtag force many outsiders imagined. Years in the jungle had honed them into predators of terrain. Commander Lando, a wiry man hardened by decades of guerrilla warfare, directed his fighters with precision. From hidden bunkers, they unleashed bursts of automatic fire, then melted back into tunnels dug beneath the earth. They knew the valley like their own blood. Every dip, every ridge, every place a man could hide or die. But the army was no stranger to this. Lieutenant Santos ordered a squad to flank left, using smoke grenades to obscure their movement. Gray clouds billowed, curling through the trees. Soldiers crawled on their bellies, mud streaking their uniforms as bullets snapped overhead. One misstep, one raised head, and it would be over. Mortar rounds from the Army's rear units thumped, arcing into the air before crashing onto the slopes where the insurgents hid. Earth erupted, trees splintered, and for a moment the NPA's fire slackened. The soldiers seized the chance, charging forward with a battle cry, rifles spitting fire. The valley roared, hours stretched like lifetimes. By midday, the firefight showed no signs of slowing. The heat was merciless, sweat stinging eyes, mixing with grime and blood. Flies buzzed where bodies lay. Communication crackled in radios, calls for medics, reports of ammunition running low, desperate requests for reinforcements. Captain Elias moved from cover to cover, his presence a lifeline for his men. He fired controlled bursts, conserving bullets, every squeeze of the trigger measured. He knew panic wasted ammunition, and in war, bullets were as precious as water. On the other side, Commander Lando's fighters were equally fierce. Many were farmers by day, guerrillas by night, their lives bound to an ideology that promised justice through revolution. Some were boys barely out of their teens, gripping rifles with trembling hands, but eyes hardened by poverty and rage. For them, the valley was more than a battlefield. It was a statement that they would not bow. By late afternoon, the valley was blanketed in smoke. Fires burned where grenades had landed, black plumes rising into the sky. The once green expanse was now torn apart. Soil churned into trenches of mud and blood. Bodies, both soldier and insurgent, lay where they had fallen, faces frozen in the last instant of battle. Elias pressed his back against a rock, heart hammering. He glanced at his watch. They had been fighting for nearly 10 hours. Ammunition was nearly spent. Dizon had been evacuated by medics, but Reyes was down, shot through the chest. Elias had seen the light leave his eyes, another ghost to carry. And yet surrender was not an option. Reinforcements were finally arriving, the sound of armored vehicles grinding closer, their engines a growl of steel and determination. The NPA fighters, realizing they were being encircled, began to retreat deeper into the hills, fading into the labyrinth of tunnels. But they did not retreat quietly. They laid mines, triggered booby traps, and fought in rearguard actions, slowing every step of the Army's advance. Each corner was a gamble, each clearing a possible death sentence. The valley seemed to resist, as if the land itself had chosen to keep bleeding. As night fell, the firefight dwindled, reduced to sporadic bursts and the occasional explosion of a grenade. The jungle grew eerily quiet again, but the silence was no relief. It was heavy, mourning, as though the valley itself grieved. When the army finally secured the area, the cost was staggering. Dozens of insurgents dead, but at a price. Too many soldiers wounded, too many never returning home. Captain Elias stood among the wreckage, helmet tucked under his arm, staring at the smoke that still rose from the valley floor. His men gathered around him, exhausted, faces smeared with dirt and grief. They had survived, but none felt victorious. The valley was silent again, save for the crackle of small fires and the distant cries of wounded men. The name Gunsmoke Valley would not just be remembered. It would be etched in the hearts of every man who had stepped foot there that day. For the Army, it was another battle in a long, endless war. For the NPA, it was another stand in a struggle that refused to die. For the people of Mindoro, it was another scar on land already weary of blood. As Elias looked at the horizon, the stars faintly piercing the smoke, he knew the truth. Battles ended, yes. But wars like this, wars fought not just with guns, but with hunger, poverty, and belief. They did not die with bullets. They lingered, as stubborn and enduring as the mountains of Mindoro themselves. And so the valley slept, cloaked in ashes and silence, waiting. Because somewhere in its soil, beneath the shadows of the hills, the seeds of the next firefight were already being sown. The soldiers would remember it. The insurgents would whisper about it. The land would carry it. Forever, it would be called Gunsmoke Valley.